Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Today is Monday, July 10th. Let's see. Let's hop into Yu-Gi-Oh! Not a lot going on today as far as news. It seems like Yu-Gi-Oh! Has hit a point where there are just no new notifications. Not to be confused with notifications, which should be a thing, but I don't think they are. Maybe we have a full stack of daily quests, but it also seems like you can have 9 daily quests, and I have like 8. So I do need to get them done, but I don't feel like I missed any. So over the weekend, after giving up on Harry Potter and the Magic Awakens, which I believe I already talked about, long story short, too much microtransactions, not enough game, really buggy, just no way forward to play that game at all. I'm not 100% sure it was causing my computer to crash, but I'm 99.9% sure. Over the weekend, I only managed to do an episode 0 just looking at the setup and settings for Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I've painted myself into a corner here. I don't even have that many legacy packs. Well, I've painted myself into a corner in that I've installed Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I don't have enough hard drive space to install any other big game. So, I wanted to play Shadow of Mordor, and instead I had installed Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I probably told them both to install and just Steam installed one before the other and then ran out of space. It would be a huge hassle and not worth it to upgrade my main C drive SSD, but at some point in the future I may have to opt to do something like that. I don't know specifically what point in the future that would be, but whatever. So yeah, I only managed to play the episode 0, which wasn't really even playing. It was just doing the settings, which increasingly I find myself, if I've taken 10-20 minutes looking over the settings and talking about what setup I'm going to use to play the game, that's probably a good point to just say no and in the episode, so we can get a quicker jump into the actual story in episode 1. But yeah, I only got that far, and then I decided I wanted to play Yu-Gi-Oh! No, not Yu-Gi-Oh! Luigi's Mansion 3, which I'm at least halfway through, probably 2/3 of the way through, with Luigi's Mansion 3, playing it over the weekend. It's very much a vacuum cleaner simulator game. You are just vacuum cleaning a lot of garbage and a lot of items, looking for gold and dollars, and it's basically a Wario game versus what Wario games have become. It's an old Wario game in which the goal is to get as much money as possible. The only slight difference is the gameplay mechanic there. Whereas Luigi Mansion, Luigi walks kind of slowly and is more like a Ghostbusters, sucking in things with a vacuum, sucking in ghosts, and sucking in money and sucking in trash. It just, this vacuum cleaner sucks everything up. There is a slam attack that I don't know if that slam attack was always there in the first Luigi's Mansion, and I don't think I ever played Luigi's Mansion 2, so I don't know where the improvements really happened. But it may very well be a case that part of the reason why they haven't done a physical release of Luigi's Mansion 1 is that it is just so drastically different from Luigi's Mansion 3 and difficult. Even Luigi's Mansion 3 is a little difficult in that it doesn't explain some things and that it really should. There's no tutorialization, And generally, I have to slam Nintendo for just making games that you burn through in a weekend. They are expensive games for as quickly as you burn through them compared to other developers' games that it takes me considerable amount of time to defeat. It usually takes me 1, 2, 3 weeks to beat a game on PC, and yet I beat Nintendo games in 2 days. Perhaps it's the same amount of runtime, but there's definitely a different feeling there where it feels like Nintendo games are, you beat them just too fast. So I guess I can empathize a little bit with kids these days saying, oh, I already beat that game. Whereas I feel like back when I was a kid in the 80s, when we were saying, oh, I already beat Super Mario Bros. 3, we were probably lying more often than not. Because, yeah, those games were brutally difficult. And yeah, maybe that is a major part of it too, is that Nintendo games have really figured out how to be fairly easy, but and that has created an added element to the whole system where you just never die. Although in Luigi's Mansion, I'd say that's absolutely not the case. I've died multiple times, and it resets your progress after you die, or you spend $1,000 to get a gold bone to get an instant life refill, which you really shouldn't do, because this is yet another thing that they didn't explain well. But the main goal of Luigi's Mansion, like Super Mario Land 3 with Wario, is to have as much money as possible at the end, and 1,000 is a big enough amount of money to go missing. I have like 55,000, and again, it feels to me like I'm somewhere between halfway through the game and 2/3 of the way through the game. So I'm questioning, unless they add some new feature, that breaking even 100,000 is going to be kind of hard to do. Although there are also these rare ghosts that I haven't even seen them talk about or seen any of, so maybe they'll make you run through the entire mansion a second time. That is a possibility. Wonder if I could have summoned something here. No, not really. If I had activated this effect. There is a point, and I think there should be some warning here at the earliest part of the game, where it said they should tell you just not to bother to suck up garbage, because each level in Luigi's Mansion 3, and I feel like this is where Luigi's Mansion 3 changes most drastically from 1, each level of this hotel is effectively just a whole different setting. It starts off all very realistic in that you're in a hotel and you're going through rooms in a hotel, but then you enter a floor that is straight up just a historical museum with a giant skeleton dinosaurs, and it's obviously a case where that would not be in a hotel. Then you enter a floor that is just a medieval tournament arena, and then you enter a floor that's a giant pyramid covered in sand, and the giant pyramid covered in sand just all around it, well, it's not covered in sand, the pyramid isn't, but the rest of the room is, and it's a very big room, and I stupidly spent a ton of time just sucking up all the sand in that room, and absolutely nothing happened for doing that. And unless the game says for every single particle or thing you suck up, you get some kind of reward later on, it really should just warn you to don't bother to suck up junk. I also thought that perhaps the game was going to save the state of rooms, as far as how dirty they are. And so if you clean up the room, then the hotel value might be better. It does that while you're on the same floor, but when you leave the floor and then come back to the floor, everything is reset. And it definitely feels like the game has a system here where it wants you at some point to go back to the floor to catch booze once it introduces the idea of booze, which is more of a hide and seek system. When you're looking for booze, you're going to end up going back to floors and investigating the other floors. Well, when you get back to the floor the second time, there's a lot of just randomly spawned enemies, and it feels like they are very much just randomly spawned. It's kind of disappointing that they're keeping account of how many ghosts you capture, because the numbers just seem incredibly low for as many as it feels like I have captured, and I'm not 100% sure it isn't because I'm slamming the ghosts, and when I slam the ghosts I'm not actually capturing them and sucking them into the vacuum cleaner. So maybe there is something to be said about once they get to about 20 health, you stop slamming them. But then the slam system works very nicely when there's multiple ghosts, because you can slam one ghost into another ghost and do damage to both. But yeah, a lot of things just going unexplained. And you get that from the very beginning of Luigi's Mansion 3, because at the very beginning of it, you have a letter that Luigi is holding, the invitation to the hotel, and it's just a bunch of scribbles. And yet, in the menu, you can go to a prologue that is not a 3D version of that scene, but a 2D version of the scene. And in the 2D version of the scene, it is written in English, so you can actually read what's on the invitation. So you get a bunch of pantomime, just no voice acting really, intro. There is some conversations and dialogues that pop up later on, so it's not all no narrative, no writing, but it's enough at the beginning to make you almost wonder if it was going to be not localized to any language just out of laziness. There's a gem collection system, which your mileage will vary drastically based on how lucky you are as far as finding all the gems. I assume finding a full set of the gems will increase the valuation of your file and give you a better ending if you collect a full set. And for the most part, I've been able to find all the sets after floor 7, but you're really tutorializing between floor 5 and basement floor 1, and so I've spent a couple extra hours just going through those early levels with new abilities to try and find the gems, and still have managed to miss a few. In fact, I'm surprised I did better finding the booze on the early floors than I did finding gems. My real concern certainly is that it is just going to at some point throw a boss at you, and then that'll be the end of the game. Hopefully it will give you a warning, but that's about it, I imagine. There is what looks like a split screen or even online multiplayer section, side section I'll try to engage with and see how far I can get. As soon as you install the game, it's trying to get me to buy DLC, which that leaves a very bitter taste in my mouth for a Nintendo console. Certainly, it's just to say, hey, buy this DLC for more multiplayer content. In fact, the fact that it has any multiplayer content for a game like Luigi's Mansion seems inappropriate. It feels like you're not getting exactly 13 floors, which would have been my guess. It seems like you're getting 14 and 15, so at a certain point, if you can't squeeze it into 13 floors, then you should go up to like 20 instead of having a multiplayer, or just make the floors a little bit bigger too. Some floors are fairly small, but then there are also some challenges that are just incredibly difficult with no real solutions, and they're fairly bespoke. At one point, sharks basically start chasing me, and there's really no way to defeat the sharks or avoid them other than just timing it so that the sharks don't hit you. And that's like the only time you see sharks, I think, in the entire game. So yeah, while that was an interesting concept, it's missing a standard Nintendo thing where you would have like a very small baby shark that can't really hurt you. It can only do a little bit of damage to you, and then you would get used to that, and then you'd have larger sharks that could kill you. Most things that damage Luigi either instantly kill him, or in a way that he loses like 10 or 20 health, which isn't instant killing. Most things do 20 health out of 100, and there's no way it seems to increase his health or reduce the amount of damage he takes. If he falls to his death, he'll take 10 damage. If he slips on a banana peel in a few places, he'll take 1 damage. There's another section where you get attacked by bats, and they don't have any kind of tutorial there at all to tell you how to defeat the bats flying around you. Assumedly, this was just something that would have been in the previous games, and they're just not bothering to re-tutorialize people. But I'm fairly certain Luigi's Mansion 3 is the first Switch game, so clearly they should have expected some people to either have forgotten or to have not played the previous games. So the bats fly around you, and they're doing like 5 damage every second or so, and nobody tells you that you're supposed to pull the left and right trigger to make the vacuum cleaner do a little area of effect damage attack to shoot them away. In the game, it wasn't until much later after I figured that out by looking at, I didn't figure it out, I looked it up online, that I started to realize that a lot of these smaller creatures like rats, spiders, bats, birds, ravens, a lot of them, I think, even though you can suck them up in the vacuum cleaner, might also be defeatable by shooting the flashlight, strobe light in it, not to be confused with the black light functions. You flash the ghost to startle them so they freeze, then you can run behind them and suck them up with the vacuum cleaner part. But yeah. There's major problems, in my opinion, with its tutorialization. And the game is dangerously close to being grindy. Particularly since it does instantly spawn enemies when you return to floors, or randomly spawn enemies, it feels like. It feels to me, and the game really indicates to me, that you would be able to clean a floor completely of ghosts, because the lights get brighter in a room when you've cleaned it of ghosts. but then you come back to the floor later and then the bright lights are dim again. It feels to me like there should be a limited number of ghosts. The limited number of ghosts should give you some kind of money value. Oh, I've just lost here, so it's just in the turn. And that would just be the game. Is that you would clean out each floor of trash, and there would be like a cleaning fee that lowered your score potentially if you, at the end of the game, for every piece of trash you didn't suck up, or you add value to your score. Nintendo would definitely add value for cleaning, not reduce your score. But yeah, it feels like it should be more like a Skyrim game if Skyrim was around vacuuming. There's a non-Nintendo game that was on the Wii that feels very reminiscent to this game, where you had a vacuum cleaner and you were looking for these little spirit creatures. The difference there is, I think, in that game is it was more of a first-person shooter game, and the scale was different. You would run around the room, a single room, instead of Luigi's Mansion, which is zoomed out, and there's actually very little that you can suck up and interact with in each room. But yeah, can't really call it a bad game. I think there's probably just a case where a lot of people won't like its style of game, or they will play it for a while and get bored. Like, there is a danger, certainly, if parents see kids playing a game where they're vacuuming, where they will just then harangue and harass their kids, by saying, "Why don't you vacuum your room for real?" Which obviously the actual physical activity of cleaning is nowhere close to an imaginary ghost busting game when you're vacuuming, but I could easily see parents not really seeing the difference there. You can break a lot of things. There is a shocking spot in the middle of the game where you get a basically chainsaw device, and you can run around this room cutting grass that's grown out of the floor and destroying sofas and beds, and just every piece of material in that room is surprising out of just nothing, very destructible in parts. It clearly seems like an experiment they were doing as far as a destructible environment. But you really can't leave the room with the chainsaw, so once you've emptied the room completely of all items, you've had your fun. And again, I would have thought that there would have been a mini reward for doing that, and there wasn't. Which is weird, because there are many rewards for doing things. Like, there's a pool table, and if you suck all the pool balls down the holes of the pool table the first time, you'll get a reward. Plus, doing things like that often unlock gems. So it's surprising when you do something that feels like it should be something and nothing happens. Let's see, let's go ahead and play this first. But yeah, for the game to have as much of a destructible environment is surprising. I've always wanted a game where you could just destroy everything, and just to see what that would be like, to the point where you'd eventually just destroy the walls and be in an empty white box floating in space. I imagine the more practical thing is to do something more like Luigi's Mansion was doing in that scene, where you can destroy everything except for the walls. Of course, I don't know if that's really ever going to be fun in the long term. But it's a cool idea. it's a cool idea that can be taken definitely too far. There's entire generation of games that tried to have increasing destructible environment, and there was that Microsoft game where all the destruction in Crackdown 3 was supposed to be done on servers, and they eventually just abandoned that idea. Let's go ahead and attack here and see what happens. Then attack here and see what happens. My biggest, I guess, concern is that I'm going to beat Luigi's Mansion 3 and in probably later today or tomorrow, and then I'm just going to want to play one of the other Nintendo Switch games I've purchased, one of the two other ones. Although in all fairness, I haven't gotten back to playing Pokemon Snap. So yeah. The truth is, I just never really had enough time to justify owning a Switch and playing Switch games, but I definitely wanted to catch up, considering, well, I had a Wii, so I just have skipped the Wii U. I had a Wii, but I don't know if I really was buying Wii games in its late period, because I didn't like play Skyward Sword, and that's one of the games I've now bought in here. And there were several games for the Wii U that nobody played because of the because it was on the Wii U. Let's see. Do we have enough? Let's just end the turn here. But yeah, I really should be playing footage I can put on my YouTube channel versus just playing games that I can only slightly describe because of Nintendo copyright claims. Right. We have enjoyed a fairly slow week last week. I did experiment with not putting anything in the chat as far as the rules and all of that, but the chat decorum being posted in the chat did not lead for that 1 week to anybody commenting, so I'll just go back to what I was doing before, which is posting the chat decorum. I'm still open to ways of rephrasing it, as long as the general concepts are passed along. It is very possible I've written it poorly, or written it like in the way a kindergarten might speak to kindergartners, a kindergarten teacher might speak to kindergartners. But honestly, I think the truth is I got quite a few views in the last stream and just no comments. Although weirdly, part of the reason I may have gotten quite a few views in the Friday stream is because my computer rebooted in the middle of that, and so the back half of that stream is now just going to be airing later on in the catch-ups, and it's lost as far as the live stream goes. Again, I'm fairly certain my computer rebooted twice in as many days because of NetEase's loading bay launcher, or just or Harry Potter's The Magic Awakens being buggy. I think it's probably the launcher. Here we have somebody in the chat says Dragon Link. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, though. So, going through the video game news, Sega of America workers have successfully voted to unionize. The majority vote means Sega of America workers will have their union, which marks the first ever union for the Sonic and Like a Dragon developer. Which, that seems weird that there isn't a union at Sega in Japan. I thought unionization was pretty much standard in companies in Japan. I question maybe if unionization doesn't really mean much in Japan. It'll be interesting to see if Sega of America does do kind of these standard ideas as far as attempting to union bust. Like the first vote to unionize is really just the first step on a very long journey of fighting against management, and it's the first step saying we recognize that the management has not been good enough to justify not having a union. Yeah. So, but we've had several companies in the United States that have made it to that step of the first step to unionize, and then there's been some pushback by the management trying to delegitimize the votes, and then it kind of goes somewhat quiet after that as they start to negotiate. The part that is disappointing for a journalist certainly is the fact that once a union happens, then there's probably a multi-year process to establish a initial contract, which isn't going to be particularly good for the union members, relatively speaking. And then that initial contract is potentially going to be multiple years long, and then you get into that first renegotiation of the contract where you start to push for improvements, and that's usually when management starts to push back even more. And then that's just how unions go, is that you're either constantly renegotiating a contract trying to improve the situation, the working conditions, and the pay rate. United States has a weird thing that if you strike in some states over the pay rate, you have less protections under the law than if you strike over the working conditions. But yeah, it's not a very, for lack of a better term, sexy story after the fact. When you specifically apply it to Sonic workers, Sega of America workers, they, I think, might be the slightly better team making Sonic games, but but I think the Sonic Mania team pretty much has moved on to something else. So you really have just both a kind of bad Japanese team making Sonic games and a kind of bad American team making Sonic games. And we hope that they're going to get better, certainly, but really don't know. We could get some real numbers here as far as 200 member group vote conducted by the National Labor Relations Board, 91 to 26 majority, which is to show that nearly half of the members did not vote at all. Zavner Macadella says, me so wrong, opponent lose. Hello, I'm from Brazil. Yep, same. Okay, I think I'm following what he's saying somewhat now. Nice to meet you too. This is another Communication Workers of America, AGIS. AGIS being the Allied Employees Guild Improving Sega. I guess that's kind of a new title. But yeah, this is a Communications Workers of America local union. So we're increasingly seeing that there is no other union trying to push forward into the video game world as far as unionization. Workers who would have worked at AT&T and Verizon are now trying to form unions in video game ways, which I assume that is fairly much in part because there aren't that many workers left in the telephone industry, and that they're trying to spread out to maintain their unions' relevancy. Now, I don't know how the monies really work there, if all the union dues go to a specific union local, or if some of the union dues go to a national union, CWA group, or if it gets put even in a pool. There is always this danger where older locals and people who have been in a union for a long time will unfairly benefit more than the new guys do. And so if a story came out that said this CWA local was having to pay national dues into some big pool, and those national dues are then funding the strike funds or just the general expenses funds of a union that is in a totally different industry of telephone workers, I imagine some people would not be happy about that. There is almost certainly in the CWA a national strike fund, so at a certain level your local dues are probably funding other workers in a different industry striking for conditions that will not benefit you. But that is kind of also the idea of solidarity, is that you help all union members rise. A rising boat, like a rising tide raises all boats mentality. And in general, union members' solidarity applies to union members of completely different unions. So if you see like a police union striking and you're in the CWA video game union local, you still would opt to support them. Although in that case in particular, the police unions have been by far the most anti-union unions ever, and they do not support any other unionization efforts or striking, and often the police are the people cracking heads of people who are striking. So that's a really bad example. Firefighters union would make a much better example. Zaber Macchiato says no play tier limits or sprite. I don't know what even sprite is, but no, I tried to make a tier limits deck and couldn't wrap my brain around it. Frankly, I just don't spend enough mental resources playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For it to learn these new meta decks. I should. I'm kind of just saving up, I guess, for the next big change and hoping that maybe I can make another deck at that point that might make some sense, but I probably don't have enough crafting points now to do that. So I made this Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck a long time ago, and it was working pretty well. up until a few months ago, and now it's very much a situation where it does all right, but not well enough. But yeah, I definitely am feeling the grind with Yu-Gi-Oh! On top of which, I am slowly burning myself out on playing Marvel Snap, which has become incredibly grindy with their conquest mode and increased amount of daily quests potentially. Let's see. I found out that at least on YouTube Shorts, to put a shopping affiliate link, you need 20,000 subscribers. It seems like they've changed the requirements there, because it definitely was giving me the impression that they were going to let just about anybody have shopping affiliate links in their videos, and that we were going to see a massive increase in attempts at using affiliate links and advertising of products in videos where advertising really isn't appropriate. That being said, we're also seeing, it feels like, a lot more baked in advertisements, and I would like to see those get attacked by YouTube if you could really do it. Like, probably the biggest, most successful channels have special contracts that allow them to do baked in ads, but you look at a Linus Tech Tips video and there's 2 ads baked into that, one at the beginning and one at the end. Most big videos have a baked in ad that you can't really skip at the beginning, on top of YouTube potentially cracking down on the skippable ads at the beginning of videos, so, or in the middle of videos, which at a certain level I would love for YouTube to say no more baked in ad stuff. That's never been allowed according to the rules anyways, and yet we've let people get away with it doing VPN and Surfshark ads in their videos like crazy. As far as sponsorships, yeah, I assume if YouTube Premium as a concept would be a lot better of a concept if there wasn't baked in ads. But yeah, I don't even remember how I got onto the rant about that. GameDeveloper.com says the Pokemon Go developer Niantic is accused of a sexual bias lawsuit. A former developer alleges Niantic consistently underpaid her for years and worked to quash female staff from raising concerns about sexism within the company. I wouldn't be surprised. Seems like sexism is still fairly prevalent. This is an interesting story from GameDeveloper.com. Apparently, a study finds that nearly every pre-2010 video game is unavailable. The Video Game History Foundation brings the game industry's long-standing issue with proper game preservation to light. So, what do they mean by unavailable? Here you have a picture of what looks like just a lot of video game guidebooks and magazines. These don't look like actual video games. Maybe these boxes back here would be video games. 87% of classic video games released between 2010 in the United States have preserved in any real capacity, failed to be preserved in any real capacity. Which I feel like the only way you possibly make that claim is if you are actively turning a blind eye to piracy and torrents online. Although, in all fairness, it may very well be a case that just because there's a torrent somewhere online, there may be nobody seeding that torrent to the point where you could actually download a 100% copy of that file. So it may just be that there are a bunch of dead torrents out there too. But yeah, if you're talking something that where the source code was tossed before pre-2010, that is very believable. If you're talking something where somebody made a copy from a floppy disk, but there is no like this museum quality copy of that floppy disk, I guess maybe there's a point there, but not much of a point because it's digital medium. So if the end product is a copy of a floppy disk and it still is 100% binarily accurate, it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, my definition of abandonware probably is even higher than 87% of all games before 2010. Classic videos and their quote commercial availability end quote that probably excludes torrent. Older titles are critically endangered. While the Library of Congress has made preserving video games easier, it's been an issue in the games industry for years, and the study underlines how much history could easily be lost. The study shows that video games released between 1975 and 1979 have an availability rate of 0.89%, which availability, I guess, meaning that you could either still buy them or you could get a copy if you contacted the video game company and were a like historian. Yeah. But yeah, as far as ROMs, between 1975 and 1979, there's a lot of them, but there's probably a lot more that were lost. Early's 90 games between 1990 and 94 have a 19.33%. It's also worth pointing out, and you really shouldn't curate for historical preservation, but it is worth pointing out that there is a significantly high amount of garbage games in those early era too. So it's not super surprising that a lot of games would have been just tossed. I also would make an argument that when you're starting to talk about some of these older games, if they were on a floppy disk, a lot of floppy disks probably have broken down at this point, demagnetized themselves. I definitely wouldn't trust a floppy disk from the 1980s to still have the data that I think is on it. And even if it was burnt to a CD-ROM, most rewritable burning CD-ROMs, I think, probably suffer from some bit rot due to them being designed poorly. So you'd probably have a decent chance of a CD-ROM being burnt, still working. If it was a pressed CD-ROM made in a factory, you have a higher chance of that working. But nothing is really perfect. Like, the best case scenario, if you were trying to preserve video games, is that you would have had to have everything on a hard drive, and then you would have had to have migrated it from that hard drive. Hopefully the hard drive would be like an array, so there was redundancy. but you would have to have migrated it from one RAID array to another RAID array to another RAID array every 4 years since 1975, which would have been insanely expensive in 1975 to do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a single person on the planet that has done that, even with a single game. It says, coming in behind in the 90s are 2005 to 2009 at 17.89%. Less than 3% of games released between 1985 remain in print today. In print being a phrase as saying that there's just no way to actually still buy it. Video games in particular, though, get re-released in different iterations. So Pac-Man, for instance, the original Pac-Man on a arcade board is not in print today, but clearly remakes, remasters, ports of Pac-Man exist. But I'm not saying that this isn't really a problem. A console's ecosystem is a major factor in play. The Commodore 64, for example, is considered abandoned because of its low sales and lack of available games. PlayStation 2 is deemed active since the games have been re-released on a consistent basis. I think their definition of the PS2 being active is fairly generous, because nobody's making, maybe one company in the past 10 years made a PS2 for a gimmick, but nobody's really printing PS2 games on discs and still selling them. They're saying the PS2 is active just because PS2 games are ported to the PS4, and a lot of PS2 games weren't ported to the PS3. So at that time, had you made the same statement, you would have said the PS2 was abandoned because there wasn't backward compatibility with the PS2. And I don't feel like it's fair ever, if you're going to call something abandonware, to say it's something is abandoned and then say, oh, now it's not abandoned. Once something's abandoned, it's abandonware. And I would say PS2 is abandoned, PS3 is abandoned. We are still seeing active releases on the PS4, so I would go generous and say PS4 is abandoned. We're almost certainly to the point where the Xbox One generation is abandoned. Mostly, I think also it's worth waiting in if the producer of the console is making any games for that console, and PlayStation is not making anything new for the PS4, I imagine, and Xbox has specifically said they have nothing in development for the Xbox One. So, yeah. The Game Boy systems were previously an active system due to there being the availability of the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops, but after those stores fronts were ended earlier this year, the number of available games declined, turning the handheld family into a, quote, neglected system. Notice that somebody here is building a lot of jargon around how you describe things and dancing around words when there's really not any legalese behind the phrases active, neglected, abandoned. If anything, I would say proving something is legally abandonware is going to be almost impossible. And there is definitely room for perhaps expanding the legal definition of abandonware to the point where more people would be confident of going and downloading a ROM. That didn't work. A major problem certainly around running ROMs is how Nintendo has really made themselves the bad guy instead of looking like the victim of running ROMs of their newest games, to the point where I think most people would be fairly willing to emulate, if it were easy, even brand new Switch games on something like a Steam Deck and not really shed a tear for Nintendo. Whereas the vast majority of other companies don't even exist now. There may be a company called Atari, but it is like the 5th time some company has bought the name to Atari and Atari has gone out of business. Nobody that worked on Atari games still works at Atari. Well, actually, I think maybe the guy that works at Atari, there may be one guy, but that would also be a really old guy who's probably not programming games anymore. Video Game Historical Foundation notes that a small handful of ways that games can be preserved these days, from owning a collection of retro consoles and games to just straight up piracy. It attributed the industry's preservation issues to the ESA, saying that the organization has consistently fought against expanding video game preservation within libraries and archives. So the ESA, they're saying, has been a problem with this. And noticeably, if every company, if the Atari that exists now also acquired a collection of Atari software, like the source code and the final products, and they had a little museum of sorts in their offices, and they said, well, we've got a perfect preserved versions of all of our games, so you don't need to worry about it. And at some point, if those individual companies all had museums like that, and they eventually gave it to a Library of Congress or somebody who could be a little bit better trusted, then you wouldn't have the need for a third-party group to try and preserve it themselves. Although it's not bad, really, to have a third-party group try and preserve the software too, just in case there's a fire at the Library of Congress or someplace. But yeah, most video game companies, well, a lot of them originally were Japanese, and all the Japanese companies ever saw when people said preservation was piracy, and they've been just constantly fighting this piracy fight for decades upon decades. And they just, like Japanese in a lot of cases, they just don't want to hear what they don't want to hear, and they are just doing the I reject your reality and substitute my own fantasy arguments. And this is where an article like this can be very annoying, in that basically nothing is going to change. Also complicating the matters, according to VGHF, our outdated copyright laws are preventing institutions like them from doing their jobs. Though libraries and archives have permission to digitally preserve video games, they're limited in what they can do with the games compared to other media, such as books and media and movies, which is to say, they can't get people to fund or support the efforts of preserving video games, because unlike a regular library that can lend out books that they have digitally preserved, or even the originals of books, you seemingly, according to VGHF, cannot lend out a video game. And it actually was kind of a hard effort just to get libraries to be able to lend out ebooks. But I don't know if you can, if the VGHF could safely lend out a copy of a floppy disk to somebody and let them install a game and run it. And we're frankly far past that idea anyways. Like, we live in a digital world, and old abandonware games in particular should just be listed on VGHF's website instead of it to download, instead of people having to go to shady torrent links and potentially downloading viruses or to pirate games. Like, most people I think would be more than happy to say, I don't pirate games, I rent them for the 2 weeks I'm allowed from the Video Game Historical Foundation's library. I think people would be more than happy with that idea. Most of these games, again, pretty bad, so people would only be pulling them out to look at them for historical nostalgia reasons or for research reasons. In the same way that most of the books in the Library of Congress are probably not worth reading, and yet we preserve that information regardless, just in case there is something worth knowing. Some developers, such as the Bleem creator Randy Linden, has started to take game preservation into their own hands, but the VGHF believes the issue will worsen in the coming years and called on the industry to acknowledge that most classic games are out of print and that the commercial market alone cannot solve this. Full report of the preservation can be read here. I think we've gotten the gist of it. GameDeveloper.com also reached out to the ESA, which I'm sure the ESA won't give anything other than a boilerplate response if they even do that. But yeah, we are definitely in a bad situation with preservation if we need and want to preserve video games. Arguably, it's not much better for any other kind of code. A lot of programs don't matter. But yeah, a lot of code is not getting preserved. A lot of programs written by kids and never released publicly in the first place, so that code also would be lost. I know I would love to have a copy of all my code that I did when I was in high school programming classes, and I think they probably did hand me a floppy disk somewhere, but I'm sure I lost that floppy disk and wouldn't be able to plug in a floppy disk drive to restore it anyways. I feel like 2K might be working their way up to potentially another Borderlands announcement. It wouldn't be super crazy if next year we got a Borderlands 4 announcement, potentially not even made by Gearbox. But yeah, otherwise you just have 2K or the Borderlands Twitter justifying itself by doing a Monday motivation video post. And yeah, still just trying to make Borderlands stay as a thing. Weirdly, we haven't seen a shift code from Borderlands Twitter since June 23rd, so they are slowing down on the shift codes. I wouldn't be 100% surprised if the shift system is actually owned by Gearbox and the shoot, darn it, messed myself up there. Wasn't paying enough attention. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Shift system is owned by Gearbox and thus Borderlands owned by 2K is moving away from that. You kind of need a constant Borderlands game if that is going to be your bazillion of guns style first-person shooter, third-person shooter, RPG game. And I don't think 2K has anything else they can offer that quite satisfies the Borderlands style of gameplay. This will be our last game for today because I'm losing attention. We did make some progress. We still have the rest of the month to try to get up to platinum. It would be nice if we could get further past platinum into diamond, but I doubt that. This is an interesting 180. Sega apparently has greenlit a blockchain game based on an immensely popular franchise. Line Next has licensed one of its games company's major franchises to create a Web3 title. Line is very popular in the Asian companies, but I'm not 100% sure what game they specifically would be talking about or what the list of Line games would be. Inherently, I need to do some research here, but I would kind of assume what is going to be at play is a long list of Chinese or Korean titles that don't have English translations. Let's see. See if we can do some research. Okay, I think this is Line. And the main part of Line under apps is its messenger thing and then games. It's kind of like a Google Play Google Play storefront. Let's see. So, let's see. We've got a lot of kid-friendly looking games here. Here's a manga, music. Line certainly has partnered with companies. Possibly Disney soon. But you'd think there would be more of a advertisement if it was that one. Like Line partnered originally with my favorite lewd gacha game, Destiny Child, but they are not involved with Destiny Child anymore. They published the global version of Destiny Child for Shift Up. Clearly, a lot of these though are nothing. So yeah, either I have found a poor list and line has more going for it, or this is not the correct line. But I think that is the correct line. So yeah, the way this is being phrased by Gamatsu is that Line has licensed one of Sega's games, I guess, to make a blockchain. So basically Sega said, okay, we'll let you make a blockchain game based on one of our franchises, which you kind of assume is Sonic. We could see perhaps a list of games. Let's see. No, that will take too long, frankly. Maybe I can do this. Gotta remember to play here too. So yeah, we've got a list here of Sega Genesis games. Bayonetta, do they really own Bayonetta IP? Or does Platinum Games own it? Well, according to this, Sega owns Bayonetta. I would be surprised if that was the case, but it's not super surprising that a publisher would own the IP to a lot of games that you wouldn't think they would. That's kind of the problem with publishers in general, is they end up owning the rights to things that the actual developers made. Is any of these games going to really lead towards, oh, that makes a lot of sense as far as blockchains? It pretty much has to be Sonic, doesn't it? Like, you need something that has a lot of characters, so unless you're going to do a crossover game with just a lot of Sega things. Like, here's the list that you would probably go through, and you wouldn't go with these other licensed ones. I mean, it could be Bayonetta, it could be Space Channel 5. It probably is Sonic, though. I doubt it's something Bubble Bobble or anything like that. I guess they also own the Megami Tensei, Shin Megami Tensei series. That makes a lot of sense. There's a massive amount of demons in that series. Yeah, I would definitely put my bet on the Shin Megami Tensei universe, Persona universe. Any of those have enough characters to potentially have a blockchain franchise around it, and that's what you're going to need, is a lot of characters. So yeah, mark my words, I'm putting my guess here as a something in the Megami Tensei universe, whether it's somehow going back to the original Megami Tensei games or the Shin Megami Tensai series or the Persona series and spin-offs there. I don't think you'd go with like Catherine, which maybe Sega owns the rights to that. It may very well be Sonic. But also it seems like this is a blockchain game that is going to first and foremost be sold to Asian people through Line. If Line is making it, and you may very well never be able to see it unless you install the Line App Store and go through that, or through the Line app itself. Which Line would definitely love to be popular in the West, but there's too many other Facebook Messenger type apps already that exist for it to make sense to go with Line. We're seeing a little bit of hype around Avatar Frontiers of Pandora from GameDeveloper.com, exploring unseen lands in the film saga. I think it's been quite the miracle that I've managed to never gain any interest in the Avatar series. If anything, it's saved me a lot of frustration, I'm sure, a lot of time. Probably not frustration, just time. Although, had I really loved Avatar 1, and then had they announced Avatar 2, and then it taken years and years for it to be made, that would have been fairly frustrating to me. Looks like I'm doomed to lose here. I'm a little surprised that we have Bugsnax being able to be ported to iOS. This has already been announced. It includes the previously released update, Dial of Bugsnax. But we are hitting a point, I think, where if a game developer really cares about it and really wants it to happen, they can now port games from a couple years ago to an iOS device and it worked fairly well. That's not obviously going to be the case for big, hyper-realistic Call of Duty first-person shooter games, but when you have a smoother, like, blobby art style, that it seems like that can port fairly well. Although you still have the problem that needs to be pointed out in that Unreal Engine and Epic is literally suing Apple, so there's really no reason why iOS and Apple should support it, go out of its way to make an Unreal Engine app run well on any iOS device. And Apple's making their M1 and M2 chips, which is completely different architecture, or it's some kind of RISC-based architecture, which is just going to make development even more difficult. Plus, the iOS devices and Apple devices now don't really support external GPUs, so there really is no reason to have any hope as far as gaming goes on any Apple product. There is just perhaps a few people who are going to be huge fans of Apple that are going to put in a lot of extra effort to get it on the iPhone. That being said, I do have something nice to say. It looks like the new tvOS, which is what Apple TV is called, I believe, and the new iOS features that have been announced, they're all fairly impressive. I managed to watch a YouTube video covering all the potential things, and it does seem like they are making steps in a pretty good direction with the tvOS updates, just to have it be more of an operating system and less of an app with a few features. That being said, right now, as Prime Day is going, I'm thinking about getting a Fire TV Cube because it has the promise of connecting to hearing aids, which would be helpful for me. And it had something else about it that potentially caught my attention. Just being 4K and streaming and having Wi-Fi 6E, maybe. But yeah, if I do end up getting a Fire TV Cube, first thing I'm gonna do is like disable all the Alexa built-in stuff. It has like different audio settings to potentially make it easier to hear things. Where are we on the solo? Another new gate has opened. Wow. While I was scrolling down there, the video really looked jagged. There's too many textures loading here. I think they're gonna have to think of a different system here, which would make a lot of sense. This is not a particularly good system. It would make a lot more sense to simply have like 8 pictures on the screen, thumbnails like this with a title above it, and then a page forward to load the next page and a page forward, instead of having just this long scroll bar, which is definitely more of a PC mentality than a tablet or phone mentality. Alright, well, we've gotten back to doing fairly long amounts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, so make up for that. Well, try and rush through the news a little bit faster. EA has opened a new AAA studio called Cliffhanger Games to develop a Black Panther project. Did the second Black Panther movie do as well as the first one? It may very well have done even better because the guy died. There is definitely an issue though where you potentially make a Black Panther game, you're not going to get the voice acting or the face appearance of the actor who died, and you also have a situation where you're not going to by default want to just make the sister character Black Panther, because in the comics she's never, I don't think she really becomes Black Panther. I think she becomes her own named character. So it feels like you're just gonna have to animate somebody called Black Panther and hope to have a game around that. And if anything, this may just highlight how slow EA and the video game world in general is, in that almost certainly this idea of making a Black Panther project was greenlit as soon as the success of the first movie, which was somewhere around 6 years ago, and it's just taken this long, perhaps in part because of delays in the pandemic, to get to the point where they could start a new company, because they didn't have enough manpower to just develop the game, I guess, under their own. I wouldn't be surprised if actually the idea of starting a new company and all that has happened fairly quickly, and it's just taken 5 years of pitching the idea to get somebody to accept it. It also may be a case that Marvel and Disney in general was not interested until recently, and now that there's just been major delays in movie productions because of the strike, the Writers Guild strike, and just less success of Marvel movies lately, that Marvel has come back to the negotiating table and said, yes, we will license out this game. It may have been last stream, it may have been the stream before that. I was talking about how American McGee has gone completely silent and we haven't heard anything for months. Well, he did put out another YouTube short showing off one of their plushies swag bunny characters that his wife basically owns the company and runs, as I understand it. It was just a little short, and in the post, people are still talking about American McGee's Alice Asylum, which was the game that never was, that didn't get approved by, I believe, EA also. So, does seem like he took a few months off, but we will potentially start to see more pushing of his merchandise. I don't know if we'll ever see him go back and stream, though, because he was streaming himself with one other person playing Alice Madness Returns, the second game in this potential trilogy, and that was pretty much 100% just promotion of the idea of a third game being made. Now that he has admitted a third game will never be made, I don't see any reason why he would ever stream. I wouldn't be surprised, though, as most creatives usually have another idea. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back in a year and does start to promote some other idea or other game. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, though. Like, they always do come back with ideas. Idea people do. But yeah, he isn't completely missing. He's just mostly missing. So I wanted to update and correct that, because I'm sure I said something along the lines that I feel like he probably took the money and ran as far as ad revenue and Kickstarter funding and people buying his swag that his wife sells as a way of potentially supporting the development of a game that had no chance of ever really being made. But he hasn't completely disappeared, so I guess that's not true. Capcom, according to Video Games Chronicle, is discussing the future of non-numbered Resident Evil remakes, which, yeah, they definitely should be discussing that. Resident Evil Code Veronica is probably the big one you would want for that, and there's definitely some other games in the series that you would skip, but some that you would want to do. Although notably here, they are only mentioning Code Veronica as far as Resident Evil games, and if anything, the fact that Capcom is discussing this is really just highlighting their lack of interest in remaking Resident Evil 5, which that is where this is going to have to just boil down is you have Resident Evil 5, you have Resident Evil 6, and both of those games were particularly bad, and they would like them not to be canon, and there's not a great way to remake 5 and 6 and be true to the story and have it work like the other reboots did. They need to pull the trigger and change the timeline. That's all they need to do, is just say, we're going to knock Resident Evil 5 and 6 out of canon. We're going to release a game called Resident Evil 5. It's going to take elements from Code Veronica and Leon, but we are not going to introduce Sheva. We're not going to have it in Africa. We're not going to touch upon the elements of Resident Evil 5 that were poorly received. In particular, that you were playing as Chris Redfield, a white buffed guy shooting a bunch of African zombies, and it just looked like the kind of oversight that an Asian person could do that looks completely racist to everybody else, and they got a lot of criticism, a lot of it unfair, for that. Then you have to remake Resident Evil 6, which is just a mess of a game anyways, so maybe you can take some of the ideas of Resident Evil 6 as far as the storyline and make that Resident Evil 5. And so, like, take half of the 4 different branching stories in Resident Evil 6 and make that Resident Evil 5, and then half of the branching storylines of Resident Evil 6 and make that Resident Evil 6. Or you just make a whole new game called Resident Evil 5 and set it completely different time, set it in the same timeline, and just say, hey, this is Resident Evil 5, but this is what Chris Redfield was doing, well, this is what Leon was doing during that time instead. Yeah. You might be able to pull that one off. But also remaking the old games makes some sense too. Or, you could also fix Resident Evil 5 pretty easily just by getting rid of Chris Redfield as a character and have Sheva be the only playable character. I think that fixes a lot of the problems. Although I doubt Capcom would be willing to have a female African protagonist. But times have changed. Let's see. Speaking of females, an all-female Final Fantasy 16 musical has been announced. This is, I assume, in Japan. Yes, this is the Takarazuka Grand Theater in Hyogo, Japan. Which, it seems like this is pretty much standard now, that they're doing orchestral presentations around Final Fantasy, around the launch of Final Fantasy games. I'm a little surprised to realize that it seems like Platinum Games also worked on Final Fantasy 16, which I wouldn't have really thought that. Apparently it's not being announced, but if it was Platinum Games, the makers of Bayonetta, that worked on it, then they would be working for Square Enix that time as a developer instead of Sega as a developer. But yeah, I imagine they didn't do the bulk of the work, but who knows. Overall, I think people are liking Final Fantasy 16, but it doesn't seem like we're getting as much of an announcement around it, as much hype around it as we should in the West. Let's see, here's the Sega's licensing a immensely popular IP for a Web3 game, blockchain game. Yeah. Again, we don't know what Sega is licensing, but I would go with the Persona Megami Tensei universe. Here's an interesting thing, that the maker of the Cat Lady is doing a AMA on Reddit, which, if anything, I think that just points to the fact that we have not gotten to a point where Reddit could be replaced with anything, as we are potentially also now being pushed towards a we're being pushed towards a situation where people are trying to abandon Twitter for Facebook's, Instagram's, Threads. It still is the same old problem of getting the majority of people to move over to a new system, and the new system potentially not being as good. Although Threads could be a lot better very quickly, you're still having to do Instagram stuff. And interestingly, Instagram's Threads already has said they don't want to do hard news or politics in their conversations. So they've already said this is not going to be the place for all conversation. We're going to do some censoring, which, yeah, Facebook is already pretty bad about censorship. So here we have a cosplayer doing one of the Elden Ring characters. I'm not familiar with her. This is a very Game of Thrones-esque, let's show a lot of side skin here type outfit. Being unfamiliar with the Elden Ring character, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I suspect it probably is. Here we have a much more clothing-centric Triss Marigold cosplay. A lot of clothing here, although she is still doing very much a comic book style. Can we get the butt and the boob in the post at the same time? If anything, I would said the photographer should have told her to hold the flag and a little bit lower so we could get the full curvature of the breast there. Kind of a simplistic pants and outfits, but still would probably have been a lot of leather work, good makeup, good hair style. You don't get a lot of Triss Marigold videos. Here is the Queen Marika outfit some more. So in a different outfit that's not as scantily clad. This might actually be a different character from Elden Ring, actually. At a certain level, as I'm questioning, whoops, didn't mean to show that second one. Here we have a character from Resident Evil. This is, again, perhaps a little bit simplistic in the clothing, but accurate to the character, certainly. Not the best lit or shot image. It seems almost like they went to a dark area to give that dark feel, but they really should have probably photographed this day for night in brightly lit photography and then in Photoshop brought it down darker. But yeah, I question whether I should bother with any of the cosplay. On the other hand, I also question if we shouldn't potentially do fan art. I'm very much a casual follower, so I'm only following a few people on Twitter, and as soon as Twitter dies, then I don't know where I'd get all the cosplay shots from. But potentially more, if I was a bigger YouTuber, having people submit fan art or links to fan art they've seen or links to cosplay would be something I would like to do. It very possibly is something where I would do well to hire somebody else to be in charge of. I was watching a YouTube video of old X-Play videos and barely paying attention to it, but one thing that really struck me now in retrospect is that the thing that made X-Play probably the best is that there was somebody writing a lot of interesting, funny stuff as far as the lines of dialogues and the overall meta narrative of what was happening on G4 at the time. And those writers, which probably be 4 or 5 people, were really doing most of the work, whereas Adam Sessler and Morgan Webb were doing a decent job as presenters, but they were mostly just doing voiceover and reading whatever text they saw on the teleprompter. Some of them, I assume, I imagine Morgan Webb and Adam Sessler were reviewing and playing a few games, but I imagine there was 4 or 5 other people writing the reviews too. And the reviews for the games themselves are actually the bad parts in X-Play, whereas the conversations in between the reviews were the thing that makes X-Play unique. So, on that aspect, as I'm just rambling here, if I was a good enough YouTuber hiring somebody to just scour the internet for fan art or cosplay and having that be their only job, and that would be interesting. There is a YouTuber that is kind of doing something like that, where it's different segments in a kind of news presentation versus the podcast style where everybody sits around the table talking about the same thing. I kind of like the idea of everybody sitting around the table talking about different things. That at some point was what the Bombcast was, but for the most part it stopped working as a concept. However, at the moment, since I'm not a big enough big enough YouTuber to hire anybody to do anything, probably shouldn't bother on the cosplay at all. It's just yet another distraction. Although it does give me an indicator, certainly, is where the hype is as far as those types of fans, which are a very small niche. Overall, though, we still have a major problem in which I don't get a good sense. Nobody gets a good survey of what gamers are actually interested in. And the best thing I could possibly do would be to continue working on a way of making a chart based on the top played games per week via SteamDB, because that is really going to give you the metric you see, where there's going to be a lot of people just playing Call of Duty and only Call of Duty, but then there's also going to be people who jump into things like Vampire Survivors and get hyped around that for a couple weeks. Moving on, Halo 1's cut content is being restored with the help of 343. Some assets from Halo Inception as an RTS have also been recovered. So, 343, not really Bungie. Working with fans to restore cut content. Although, weirdly, I am not sure if this ever means that this cut content would show up in a Master Chief Collection update or in some new re-release of Halo 1. Meanwhile, the hope to bring Halo Infinite to a spot where you could really continue that series seems to be completely diminished. So Halo is really a dying franchise at this point, just because 343 is not doing a good job making new content and seemingly is instead restoring Halo 1 content, which you just have to move away from Halo 1, regardless of how nostalgic people are. If you want to just reboot the series and make a new Halo 1, that's fine, but you can't have people buying and playing Halo 1 decades later while you're trying to sell Halo Infinite. Let's see. Square Enix is also considering remastering more old titles following the Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster's success. I would like to play Xenogears, says one shareholder, which just probably was brought up in a shareholders meeting. That being said, I am personally not going to be interested in other Final Fantasy games being remastered like the Pixel Remaster series. Although I imagine Square Enix probably did put out several other Final Fantasy-like games that weren't in the Final Fantasy series. Here you have a whole collection of characters from old Square Enix games, and with the exception of Blanca, I can't really place any of them. This guy might be in like a Tekken fighting game. But yeah. I have no idea who any of these characters are. And this is an interesting screenshot to have them all facing in profile, looking off the side. It almost feels like it's a height comparison chart. You'd think with the one guy with an eye patch, you would have had them facing the other direction so you could see his eye. But whatever. NBA players claim they have seen Call of Duty 2023. The year's game is reportedly being a continuation of Modern Warfare 2. I guess you would call this a rumor until confirmed, but probably true. It's unlikely that they're going to have much to say there, other than the only thing I guess you take from this is that Activision Blizzard is continuing to make Call of Duty games, no duh, until they get acquired, and then they'll probably continue to make Call of Duty games even then. And then here we have a Zelda Gerudo outfit cosplay, which in general I would say this is probably just an elf girl in green, slightly Zelda inspired cosplays. again, more of a bikini cosplay showing off a lot of skin, but it does have the Zelda Shiki Slate, I think is what that's called. And there is a lot of intricate work here, that, as far as design. At a certain level, though, I almost wonder if it's valid to make a character that is not really a character. Unless there's something in Tears of the Kingdom where Zelda as a character actually does wear this outfit, which I don't think she really it would ever officially be depicted in such a revealing outfit. That's just not how they ever depict Zelda. She's always in intricate, fully clothed princess outfits, or she's fully clothed as a hiding her identity as a kind of spy outfit. But yeah, at a certain point, you could just say this is Elf Girl outfit inspired by Tears of the Kingdom more than this is Zelda. Or you could also go, this is female Link outfit, or this is just a Link outfit. Although, if it were a Link outfit and you were cross-playing and cross-dressing, you wouldn't create an outfit that is accentuating the female form this much. And yeah, I don't know if this outfit exists in Tears of the Kingdom, but I would heavily suspect it doesn't. So are you really even doing a good job cosplaying? Now, inherently, because I'm only following a few Twitter people that show cosplaying, and frankly, I am leaning towards more of the lewd outfits, a lot of these people are just trying to use hashtags. Hashtag Nintendo, hashtag video game, hashtag Tears of the Kingdom. So some kid is on Twitter looking for Tears of the Kingdom, and then they end up saying this. That is kind of a bait and switch, and probably not appropriate function of Twitter. Maybe some of these videos, photos have like NSFW warnings on them, but by the vast majority of them do not work and will just pop up in front of the eyes of a kid. Not that I'd be really concerned if even like a 2-year-old saw this outfit. I'd just say, okay, yeah, she's in a swimsuit type outfit. EA Sports Football Club 24 reveal livestream is set for July 13th. Ultimate Edition cover outfits have been announced. We can see that there is a large collection of footballers here being presented, and I would say they are trying their best here to merge in more female footballers than before. It still feels like for every one you're getting 2 or 3 female characters, and there's kind of a height issue. Sure, when everybody's crouched down, this female character is in line or close enough to the other characters, but then when you have like these 2 female footballers standing up next to these other footballers, they are way taller. In fact, there's just kind of a height issue in general. It feels like all of these models, 3D models, should have been scaled in zooms to line up people a lot better. Maybe not perfectly line up people, but certainly it would have made sense to have this. And because this video looks so odd, here's another female footballer, and it looks okay at that height. That one looks okay at that height, and that one looks okay at that height. But take note, this back row has this lady and this lady, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 men. And then you have a man here, a lady here, a man here, a lady here, a man here, a man here, a lady here. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 men, 1 lady, another lady, and then 2 men. Because this looks so awkward though, it does just come off like there is a version of this in which all the ladies were added after the fact or cropped out after, could have been cropped out. I could easily see these hands being added after the fact on the shoulders, and then this lady being cropped out, and then these two ladies being cropped out. I could easily see these two ladies being cropped out completely. And I almost wonder if that is exactly what will happen in different variations of this cover around the world. Or probably there will just be a completely different cover, because you try to sell this football game in the United Kingdom and, or yeah, not United Kingdom, what am I trying to say, Saudi Arabia, almost certainly all the females would be edited out or blurred out. Or even in Israel they do that too, they blur out women. Moving on, in Modern Warfare and Warzone Season 4 Reloaded is adding the boys operators. Homelander here being shown. So a crossover event, which I kind of feel like Modern Warfare and Warzone should be more serious than that, but I'm not sure if that's really the history. If maybe the Call of Duty games are more serious, or maybe none of them are that serious. And then the creator of Monkey Island and his company Terrible Toy Box has announced that the Return to Monkey Island is now available on, what is it, Google Play and App Store. Well, it's not now available, it's coming out July 27th. So we have gone up and down with Return to Monkey Island in that it was released, it was announced, people were upset with the art style. The maker, Ron Gilbert, was upset that people were upset with the new art style, and then went fairly radio silent. The game came out, it didn't get a lot of reviews or comments on it, but I imagine it was fine. And then Sea of Thieves announced a crossover that Ron Gilbert knew nothing about, because I'm sure LucasArts owns the rights, aka Disney owns the rights to Monkey Island as an IP. And now we're seeing an App Store and Google Play release being announced. I almost wonder if this was a bone thrown to Ron Gilbert to say, we'll let you release your game on more platforms if you stop bad-mouthing, if you stop saying publicly that we didn't consult you for the Sea of Thieves crossover, which I imagine they're more hyped on. Return to Monkey Island is a point-and-click adventure game. Shouldn't really have that much trouble playing on phones, but you definitely would want to play it rotated and not in a vertical format. And I just don't really think it is going to be the best way to experience Monkey Island game of any sorts. It's back to Lucasfilm games as far as the label instead of LucasArts. Although at a certain point I imagine you could just license out any logo you wanted. Although noticeably most movie companies and production companies will not allow you to use an old logo or an old name that's no longer legally being used. The danger certainly here is that you would play something on the cell phone and it would have to be even more zoomed in, and being too zoomed in on a point-and-click adventure can be a killer. There really should have been a lot more critical review and reception to this game. If anything, I think it points out that point-and-click adventure games are just very much a niche, and most mainstream video game journalists are not fans of them. Alright, what's this last one? Oh, it's just a meme picture that I was going to download for my own personal use, where this is a big problem in computer IT jobs listing. The job description will say, we need somebody that can do work with AWS and JSX and Docker and Fire and Python and Kubernetes, which honestly, if you can do Kubernetes, then you can do Docker because they're inside of each other. And then this is, I think, Microsoft Database. Some of these I don't really recognize. .NET programming language, Windows in general, Ruby on Rails, Net, or Carbon Black, I don't even know. Just general Linux. I don't even know what this logo is about. So like half of these I don't even recognize as far as descriptions of things that you'll see in job descriptions in IT. Is like whoever in HR was given a list of things to write up in the job description, often things that then require more years of experience in them than actually you could possibly have. For example, if we said Python was 20 years old, there are plenty of job descriptions out there that want 25 years of Python experience, which is just not that crazy, not possible. Particularly if you're more realistically Python 3, if somebody was looking for like a Python version 3 experience, and then they wanted 10 plus years or 5 plus years in Python 3, I don't think Python 3 is that old. And then you get in the job, and the actual job is just working with a Microsoft Excel sheet, and none of those job descriptions are anywhere accurate to what you had been hired to, or what the job description is. And that is technically a demotion or fraud. I mean, I don't know if you can really get away with suing people for fraud for that, but if your job description is drastically changed, you're technically being fired, and you can stop showing up at that job and argue that you're demoted severely and argue for unemployment. You may not get it the way the unemployment system works in the United States, but yeah. I definitely have been in at least a couple of IT jobs that described themselves as one way and were completely different. One that hired me in particular to be a Linux build maker, Linux operating system, just to make a custom Linux desktop image. And at no point in me working there did they want me to do anything with the Linux build or anything like that. They wanted me to instead just answer service desk level 1 problems and be customer support, which was not in the job description at all. In particular, in that job's case, the company was notoriously a liar about just everything they did, but they would habitually hire people and say this is a full-time position, and then fire them before they had to give any benefits. Just cycling people in and out for no good reason, which is no way to run a business. Alright, well, the summer sale is still going on. It is overlapping with the Prime Day sale. I'm going to try to have as much conservatism as possible as far as not buying things during the Prime Day sale. And I think for the summer sale in particular, I am still not going to buy anything. This may very well be your last chance, though, to get the Steam Deck discounted, or even some games discounted, until you're talking some point in November around Black Friday sales or winter sales. And I wouldn't be surprised particularly for the Steam Deck, if you don't get any discount at all until some point in 2024, perhaps the summer sale of 2024. Now, if you can skip it, which you probably can, there's also a decent chance that there will be some updated version of the Steam Deck by summer 2024. So keep that in mind too. There's a lot of animation going on this art. It is a shame that there's not really anything to do here. Like, unless there's some kind of secret augmented reality game in this, there's no pixel to click on and nothing's interacting with anything. So yeah, let's go through the video game chronicle news. NBA 2K24 is going to feature crossplay for the first time. I think we talked about that. Nintendo released a Pikmin 4 beginner's guide. EA Sports UFC 5 announced, full reveal coming in September. NBA players have seen Call of Duty. Square Enix is considering remastering more old titles. Halo 1's cut content. Sega licensing a blockchain game. The Final Fantasy 16 musical. Honestly, it being all female probably is a mistake for any orchestra. You can get there even in Japan, where most Japanese ladies are fairly small, but when you start to think about who can play the tuba, who can bang the drums, who has that like physical exertion, it tends not to be a female person who can go the full 3-hour concert blowing a tuba or playing the drums. So a few male characters would make sense. Also, when you combine the sometimes weird perversions of Japan and the phrase all female, I almost wonder if you're going to walk in the musical and everybody in the orchestra is going to be in like a two-piece bikini playing the instruments. Probably not the case. They probably will be in the traditional classic long black dress, and in the same way that male orchestra players tend to be in suits, like cocktail ballroom gown type stuff. Which, come to think of it, the fact that that's traditional is a little weird, but they are on stage, so they should look fairly good. It's probably better that they aren't wearing like football uniforms or something like that, some kind of uniform, and that they are just going for a traditional fancy dress. But yeah, I would say it's probably more of a gimmick to say your orchestra is all female than it would be to just say, hey, let's get as the best or players we can get. You don't need to segregate orchestras by gender by any means, even if it was an attempt at being an affirmative action type thing where there was a lack of presentation of females in the orchestra. I still don't think that's segregation is the solution there, to have a separate but equal orchestra. Moving on, Capcom was discussing the future of non-numbered Resident Evil remakes. The Black Panther game and new studio was announced. Clockwork Revolution apparently is a love child of Vampire the Masquerade and Arcanium, which Vampire the Masquerade I think in the real world is liked, whereas I'd say almost every Vampire the Masquerade video game has failed pretty badly, and I don't even know what Arcanium is. Let's see. I guess they are comparing it to Vampire the Masquerade and video game. Which, okay, you've caught my attention enough for me to potentially want to pay more attention to Clockwork Revolution. Clockwork Revolution was one of the Summer Game Fest announcements that looked a lot like Bioshock Infinite, so perhaps this is a case where they are drastically trying to squash what they set up there and not make it look like they are just making a Bioshock Infinite. Let's see if we click on this trailer. Can we actually get to this trailer? Nope, it's just a screenshot of the trailer. Yeah, I've never even seen this game. This looks really, really old. But yeah, they probably are trying to squash comparisons between Bioshock Infinite because it looked a lot like Bioshock Infinite. Just like a general rip-off of that. Maybe they're trying to imply that it will play a little bit different. Vampire the Masquerade maybe implies that it has more interactions with characters and conversations going on than a Bioshock game would. We already talked about the Football Club 24 Ultimate Edition cover. And then Football Club 24 gets its first trailer ahead of a full reveal later this week. I guess check out this Video Games Chronicle article if you want to see the trailer. And then Twisted Metal gets an explicit new trailer ahead of the month's release, which is going to be on Peacock, so I imagine nobody's going to watch it. And I definitely can't watch an explicit trailer on YouTube. So let's move over to the Komatsu articles. It's still very slow. Yes, it is Monday, but last week has been slow for news, and I can already tell there aren't going to be that many Komatsu articles. NBA 2K24 has been announced for all consoles and PC. So, do they have a Steam link for it yet? No. So it's just coming to basically everything. Remember, my rewriting plugin is changing this from a long list of PC, PS4, PS5, Switch, Xbox One, and Series to just saying all consoles. All modern consoles, of course, is what it means, not PlayStation 3 or original Xboxes. Baldur's Gate 3 details Dark Urge, or in the Red, character identity and romance, which, if you're ready to get hyped around Baldur's Gate 3, I guess you'd want to read this article. Here you have an animated video just showing a bunch of different character models. And here we have flashing far too many faces. Almost certainly, particularly in Komatsu's case, it would make a lot more sense to have taken each one of these frames and put them out as a screenshot as part of the press package instead of making an animated video. This doesn't benefit anybody. If some mainstream video game journalist site wanted to make an animated GIF around it, they could do that themselves. But for a way to pause and look at it, it makes a lot more sense to just be able to pause and look at it. There's no pause buttons on animated images. I assume it's an animated GIF. And maybe that's the purpose, is that they don't want you looking too close at the visuals. It looks fine to me, though. What's funny is that while it's very herky-jerky with the camera zooming in and zooming out and moving all of this, the water flowing in the background seems almost rendered at a completely steady frame rate. Maybe that's just an effect of the water flow or what, but it almost seems like this part here was recorded differently from even like the flowers which are blowing in the wind. But yeah, I haven't yet been able to convince myself to consider playing Baldur's Gate 1 or 2, so for me personally it's hard to justify Baldur's Gate 3. Honkai Star Rail version 1.2 update, Even Immortality Ends, launches July 19th for, I guess, PC and smartphone. I think PC is the Epic Game Store exclusive, or you can download an exclusive client. Yeah, it's a shame, honestly, that Harry Potter Awakens isn't more like either Honkai Star Rail or the one before that, which from MiHoYo, Genshin Impact. Because that would have worked fairly well. If you were wandering around a much better designed area in kind of an action beat 'em up game instead of a slow card based game. Inherently, Harry Potter Magic Awakens fails because card games need to be turn based, and if you're going to have cards as an element, it really should have been turn based, and it's not. It's a high action experience, which really should have just been you swing the wand and then it lashes out like a magical whip or shoots a fireball at people when you press a certain button on a controller or when you tap a button on the screen. See, a game called Persona 5 The Phantom X Tap Game conference trailer is available. Tap being another storefront for, I think it's really just for Android phones. I don't think that you can install the Tap marketplace on iOS. I don't feel like I've even heard of Persona 5 The Phantom X, though. I didn't know Tap had a game conference either. This week's Japanese releases. Let's see, we got Atelier Marie Remake, Bloodstained Curse of the Moon for the PS4 and Switch, Color X Malice for the Nintendo Switch Special Box, Edo Zombie Uprising for the PS5, Exoprimal. I didn't realize Exoprimal just released with such little fanfare. Gunya Monster, Redemption Reapers, and Toho New World. Many of these already available digitally. We are seeing a slightly longer digital only release, where it had gotten kind of small in the past few weeks. But, yeah, seems like it's growing again. Definitely feels like very little happens during the summer, and this is what Prime Day and the summer sale is really all about. Whereas the summer sale makes sense on Steam because video games tend never to go on sale anyways. The Prime Day sales makes very little sense because this is when people are unlikely to be in the office online shopping and unlikely to need a lot of items because they are in a slower vacation summer mode. And yeah, the items on sale on Prime Days are just not like inflatable pools or swim gear or vacation equipment like picnic baskets, things like that. They tend to be just random stuff. There's not a lot of toys or video games to keep kids busy, which that should really be the focus. Is summer activity should be on sale at the Prime Day sale, not just random stuff. But the problem too is that you get people to buy stuff in July and they're either still broke from the last Christmas or they're trying to save up for the next Christmas and Black Friday. Moving on, Zanagi Games and Acquire have announced a side-scrolling soul-shifting action-adventure game called Amida for PC, which that is quite the description there. So, like a feudal era timeline where you're walking back and forth, and then you kick somebody, and then you swap bodies into another character. Interesting. there is a real danger that a game like this would just not bother to be translated and come to the West. It looks like it might have a decent amount of text to it. Also, it just doesn't seem like there's going to be that much action to it. If anything, I imagine this is somewhat of a murder mystery game more than anything. Seems like the swordsman might be the only character that you really fight with. They're calling it an action-adventure game, though. Apparently it is going to be released in English. So yeah, we'll give that a chance. Put it on the fall list, not the ignore list. We talked about EA establishing the Black Panther company, Cliffhanger Games. We talked about Bug Snacks. And then Dragon Quest Monsters The Dark Prince details the main story, the main characters, the world, and new monsters. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. And see, that was not a lot of news. We're already at GameDeveloper.com articles now. Here's the story from a couple days ago, from the 7th, saying that Sega cools blockchain and NFT interest, and then they immediately announced something, which that's clearly an incrimination on just whether Sega is telling the truth to its shareholders at shareholders meetings, which it seems like it isn't, or Sega is run by somebody who is crazy or multiple people who are crazy and not communicating with each other. Apparently the original Far Cry source code has been leaked and uploaded online. At a certain level, when you get back to the idea of video game preservation, it makes a lot of sense to start to see decompilation efforts of all old games and to draw a new line and say it's not good enough just to have the compiled final product. We want to, for historical reasons, have the source code, and decompiling old games is easy, but then converting the assembly code and the binary code, it would be binary code, machine code, from that binary to a readable source code is a lot harder. Having the labels and the names of variables and things like that takes more work if it's not handed to you by the original creators. You have to start to make up variable names and assign memory addresses as a certain variable, and you have to undo a puzzle basically to try and figure out what the code is saying and trying to do. It would be incredibly helpful in educating students if we had even a small percentage of video game source code, like Pong and things like that. If you could just hand that to a student as they're learning programming in middle school or even earlier and say, this is what Pong looks like. Look at these concepts and look at these ideas. Although Pong itself was originally just built using circuitry, so it was not even a programmed game originally. So at a certain point you would have to teach electronics and how the circuitry of the original Pong game looked. But yeah, Pac-Man code, if you had the source code for that and showed it to students. If the libraries in schools had source code for games, and if the libraries in school even had the old games that you could rent out, that would be nice. At least it's kind of crazy that right now in any high school there isn't a collection of like video games of any sort. No Switch games, no Nintendo 64 games, no NES games, nothing like that at all. At best case scenario, in some libraries I imagine you have people with RetroPies plugged to a TV, but I bet you can't rent out a RetroPie. If Raspberry Pis were cheap, at the moment that's definitely something you would want to do, is to be able to lend out RetroPies, but I also imagine people would not return them very quickly. Moving on, we already talked about EA opening a new studio, and then Sega doing a 180, and then we spoke for a long time on preservation. One thing to take from this image, let's see if this works. Here, use my magnifier to show this. You can tell on this collection of like video game guides and magazines that there is a lack of mint condition for a lot of these books. Like there's just no way, nobody was bagging and boarding these books. You can see broken spines, you can see damage. I'd say they're in decent condition, really, but they're not in mint condition by any means, and they're not even really being preserved here in the best way. There is a problem of scale, certainly, but you can see even now that none of this is under glass, so it's just going to get dust and moisture and humidity on it. None of this has been bagged or boarded. This is definitely, perhaps these are the non-mint reference copies, and they do have mint copies somewhere else, but you have paper binders and holders here that are really just the cheapest you could afford, because clearly, as somebody who collected Nintendo, you can't really afford the most expensive containers ever. You've got to buy in bulk, and it has to be fairly uniform. It all has to fit on the same height of the same shelves. Even these shelves look like they're bowing under the weight, and they're not a good enough weight. Like ideally you would have this on one of those collapsible collections where the walls of the entire books move on tracks, so you can fit more in a single place, and then you have to turn a giant gear to move the walls so that you can make enough room to walk in between it. But then on top of that, you would want humidity controlled, hermetically sealed boxes around each one, drawers around each one, and nobody can afford that level of preservation. I don't know if the Library of Congress is doing that. Like, best case scenario, if you really wanted to preserve something like this, you would find a plastic container, and then you would seal it in a plastic box, much like you see the video games and comic books and things sealed for sale by Weta. And that's about the best thing you could do. After doing that, if you wanted to preserve it for a very long time, perhaps you then seal it in a bunch of amber or something. Seal it in glass or something. Put it in a lead box. Never expose it to light. There's nothing here stopping UV from like fading out the colors. If this light is on, and if there's a window anywhere around here. But yeah, I'm not really blaming Video Game History Foundation for doing a bad job. They're doing the best they can, but they need a lot more funding, and they need government support like all libraries do, because libraries don't work unless tax people and rich people are paying for it, particularly rich people who will never step inside of a library and want to defund libraries need to pay for it. Then we already talked about the sexual bias lawsuit. We'll see how far that goes. And then that brings us to the follow list cleanup. And if I've finally fixed my auto blur correctly, this should be enabled now. Yes. So we got it. So here we have a game called Hidden Office, which looks like a 3D hidden object game, which I am open to the idea of a 3D hidden object game, but this isn't going to be the one. Here we have another hidden objects, Tranquil Valley. I'm a little surprised that they've never made an adult game that I've seen, at least, as far as hidden object adult game. This is from March. We can say no to that. Here we have Hidden Harbor 3D top down. That is also from March. Some of these I obviously was not. I was being very generous by putting them on the follow list. Hidden Bunny. If everything starts hidden, I imagine we're going to end up with just a bunch of hidden objects as far as the follow list cleanup today. Exo Rogue from January. It's 25 reviews. It's not quite there. Should I give it more time? I'll be generous and give it more time. Hexy, on the other hand, I will say no to. Hexagon block puzzles. Think we can say no to. Then we have Hex Rally Racers. Think we can say no to this. Online now, peak today. Yeah. It's a free-to-play game that's single player only, and well, it seems like at some point people liked it. Magical characters racing. I think this is the game where you're riding on broomsticks and racing, which is an interesting concept. Yeah, I didn't even mention that the Harry Potter game had a broomstick you could fly around because it's such a small area and it just doesn't really matter. I'm going to leave this one on the follow list to consider later. Hex Picross is mixed reviewed, so it's going. Why do I have so many games on the follow list? There's usually only about 5. It's programmed to only open 5. Maybe I ran the macro twice. That may very well have been the case. X of the Lich isn't relevant. Hero-ish. Side-scrolling game. Strategy, action, RPG. Smash to the ranks of 1 of 6 hero-ish champions. Assemble your troops. This doesn't look bad, but it's not very relevant. It's $5 single player or online player. I guess at a certain point I am just starting to consider whether anything has ever gone on sale, and since this is December of 2022, yeah, I'm gonna say it's not quite there, just because in that time frame they barely have 35 reviews. Just not that relevant. And so then this, I guess, is probably new games. Yeah. So we have what looks like an RPG maker called Irrational. That's going to be a no. We have Presence Dark Awakens, which looks like it's just a bunch of scenes. So I'm going to say no to it. Lovux. Analytic puzzle. Trying to break all the glass screens while using different types of mechanics. Like visually, this just doesn't look enough like something. That's a weird system, to say the least. It's a slide puzzle, but then the final action on it is to try and break the glass, which there might be something to the feedback of the glass breaking being very interesting, but the rest of the visuals just don't look that good. Here we have Legend of Heroes, Trail of Reverie, Trails into Reverie. Okay. Part of the Trails series. It's already very positive. I could probably put it already on the wish list and save myself some frustration, but you know, sometimes when these games have high reviews early on, I kind of want to wait a little bit and see if maybe the hype dies down after the first few weeks. Here we can see they're selling some summer gear for all the female characters and male characters, although male characters noticeably no nipples on any of them. But the actual game is this, so don't get too confused as to what you're saying. Night Steel Survivors. You know what, this is slightly visually well polished. I'm willing to give it a little bit more of a thought. I think inherently the problem though with the Survivors games is that if you're just going to be in one room fighting a bunch of enemies over and over again, the visuals need to be a little bit more varied on the floor design and the enemy design. This seems just a little too repetitive. Let's see, next we have Terra Codex, the Stone Relics. Is this a VR game? Yep. We'll make a YouTube short around that. Caveira, Islands of Apes. Seems like what they've done here is they've just asset flipped a game with some ape models. It is a little surprising that there isn't a Planet of the Apes style game, considering Planet of the Apes does exist. I know there is probably a Planet of the Apes game. There was an official license, but it's not the craziest of ideas. Although you probably wouldn't just do big gorilla, big ape, monkey mask characters. You would probably want to create something like a Neanderthal, almost humanoid characters, or if you are going to go with apes or gorillas running a society, it shouldn't just look like Earth, but apes are walking around. Honestly, even the Planet of the Apes movie gimmick was kind of ridiculous because of that. Feels like something that would make a lot more sense if you wrote it as a book and didn't have to explain too much, because once you visually have to explain everything, it makes less sense. But yeah, this is just a asset flip game. Then we have A Light in the Dark, which looks like a Survivors game. Yeah. Overall, I really feel like the fad around all these Survivors games has just really destroyed my interest in any top-down twin-stick shooter high-action games. So, yeah, I'm just going to say no to this. Racing Tanks. Looks incredibly simplistic visually. Cryptid. I guess the question is going to come down to whether we see any adult games today, or are we just going to burn through this fairly quickly. Dunia, the North Wood. Not quite enough visual polish, and then that screen here, that kills it. And this trailer kills it for me. So that's going to be no. Honey, are you there? This is another one of these horror asset flip games that look far too good for what they were. Although the idea of looking for your wife or girlfriend and not being able to find him, and instead finding a horror monster, is an interesting idea. Although I don't know if that's really what this is. It says you're a middle-aged man plagued with mental health problems. His home has become a site of unexplainable paranormal activity, and a malevolent female entity is pursuing him to his death. Just very generic description. Yeah. There was another game like that where a kid goes missing and you're looking for the kid, and then it devolves into more of a horror aspect. The kid is missing in like a carnival. Yeah, I think a horror story like that is a good setup. Start with something very relatable and tangible in a movie or story where somebody is missing. We've all lost a kid for a few minutes, lost a family member for a few minutes, or been lost ourselves. So start with something like that and then evolve it to something a lot more scary, instead of immediately jumping into the scariest thing you can possibly display. That is certainly a skill I think a lot of story writers have forgotten or never learned. Let's see, here we have Freedom Farming the American Way, which seems like you're dropping missiles on farms from like a drone, but you also have a gun you're shooting for some reason. This is clearly a troll game, and I'm fairly certain this developer, the Zoo, is a troll developer. Let's just do a little research here. Yep. Tower defense, running over zombies, bullet chests, sugar bear. Valve has apparently kicked off hundreds of games that were just of really low quality, and the developers on Steam. I will heavily suspect that very little of the games that they kicked off were of good enough quality to ever even be on my fall list. So I probably won't recognize anything, and if I don't recognize any change, I imagine pretty much nobody else on Steam will recognize any change. I think very heavily, while the headline I saw was saying that a lot of games and developers have been kicked off, I think very heavily they were almost all AI developers, people who said they had AI art in their game, and there isn't a real curation happening here where they're going back and looking at old bad games and kicking them off the platform. Although you could very easily do that. I mean, it's not hard for Steam to go and look for games that have completely negative reviews or no reviews, games that sell very low, and just say, hey, these are really bad games. I wish if they were going to do that level of curation or gatekeeping, they should just have announced metrics to say when you put something on Steam for Steam Direct, you get 2 years of your game being on Steam Direct, but at which point, if it doesn't have at least a certain number of reviews or isn't reviewed a certain level of policy, we take it down. You're never really going to address the issue that for a year, for 6 months, for 6 weeks, a bad game will still be on Steam because of Steam Direct. But you can certainly say, hey, we're going to save ourselves some frustration and get rid of some old games and make the storefront a little bit better. No other storefront exists, digitally or physically, that keeps as much garbage on their storefront as Steam does. Amazon.com has a lot of garbage products, but they get taken down and go away fairly quickly. or fairly frequently. A physical Walmart definitely does not have a ton of garbage stuff from years ago still on their shelves. Although some storefronts and Walmarts may have a few things on their shelves from like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This approaching Cow Army game is just yet another low effort survivors game. Here we have one called Blind Sound that I assume means it's a horror asset flip game that is heavily around sound effects. But it does have visuals, and the visuals don't look that good. And then we do have our first adult game. Pure Fun VR is a VR robotic hands, which I think that's probably a mistake while you're groping. And wow, in this trailer is actual urination happening. And in the screenshot. So, P-Play tends not to be anything. The thumbnail is super simplistic. It looks like you've got maybe 2 different female models that you can puppet and interact with. They seem like in the video to actually react a little bit better. They have at least some basic animations where they go back and forth. The game is $5.99. It's English only. Yeah. I think for people looking for VR porn, you're not going to have a large collection, and there is definitely some lack of polish here. All the screenshots are probably framed incorrectly because they're taken from a VR application. Nothing interesting in the settings, it's just a bedroom. This probably is the right direction to go as far as adult games though. Go VR. Although I've heard that people burn out on VR porn because there's just not enough of it compared to the vast majority of 2D porn or flat porn, I guess is what you might call it instead. And as such, you just can't consistently only engage with VR porn as a solution, and it also, I think, is probably a little tiring, if I was to guess, wearing a VR headset and looking at porn, if not dangerous, looking at porn while having your eyes covered as far as who walks in the room and or who's watching you. Okay, we have a game here called Invicta, the Next Queen. This looks interesting. Maybe a little bit of a Braid appearance to it. Although walking down highways and hacking and slashing is fairly generic. So we'll give that a follow. Here we have something called Turn Out the Lights, which looks like mostly a text-based game. Looks like it's all over the place. And they're using like stock footage in their trailer. So I'm going to say no to that. Next we have Silent Station. Social psychological multiplayer game based on the rules of classic Mafia, complemented by featuring a setting of death traps. And seems like they can do force chokes on you. All these screenshots look pretty terrible though. Yeah, this game is not selling itself particularly well visually with the screenshots, so I'm going to say no to it. And then Five Nights at Smogs, which is obviously just a Five Nights at Freddy's ripoff, which I have no interest in. Luin Nguk, I don't know how you'd even pronounce that. Looks like an RPG Maker game, so I'm going to say no to that. Let's see. Crazy Flasher 7 Mercenary Emperor standalone version. Does this have adult content in it? Bloody scenes in battle. So it says it's a classic old web game action role playing in 2010, fighting zombies. So, oh, it's probably supposed to be Crazy Slasher 7. But it was made in Flash animation, so they called it Crazy Flasher. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's 6 other games before it. Notably, we never really did see Flash games get ported or remade, because they were always these super simplistic games, and they were basically free, or they were small enough that you could actually download them and play them, or you didn't even really have to download them on a computer back when the internet was incredibly slow and you had limited bandwidth. Once those were no longer an issue, Flash games pretty much died with the I would say they probably died far before the end of support for Flash animation. And Adobe Flash animation really highlighted how we were supporting a company like Adobe when we really shouldn't have. Now there is a weird aspect to this. It does seem like some of the characters are in kind of lewd outfits, but you have like a stripper girl, but I don't think there's actually any flashing going on as far as showing off your body. And honestly, I don't think this is actually a good game. I think this is an attempt at a Chinese game, or a Chinese company trying to release a new game. What's funny is they're comparing it to Dust. So I'd say this game has just far too many red flags to make a YouTube short around it. Plus, it's just not. If you want a high action hack and slash game, Dust might be a good choice. There's almost certainly something more modern to consider. Maybe Plated Fury. Let's see, do we have any of these others? Any of these games that are on my wish list, probably a better choice than the horrible graphics you would get on this. Let's see. Next we have what looks like another Survivors clone. Broke Chicken is what it's called. Yet another Chinese-Russian offering. I'd assume Chinese. Which, it's weird for Steam to say they got rid of a bunch of low quality games, because in the past 5 days or so it seems like we have gotten an increase in cheap Chinese games that support some other language like English or Russian games. I'm gonna say no to that, whatever that is. Next we have Infiltrate a Cult. Looks like it's a RPG Maker game. I saw some kind of anime, I think it was, on Hulu, where this lady acquires a cult somehow and is the new cult leader. Yeah, this again feels like just a cheap Chinese RPG Maker game. It may not really be an anime as much as it is a Western comedy series. I think it's more of a Western comedy series, and it may not be Hulu, it may be Netflix. Yep. So, yeah. I'm still trying to work through watching Futurama, but Hulu is also fighting me at every step and trying to push me back to a previous episode. It is kind of clearly glitched and thinking I haven't watched an episode, and I don't have a way that I know of to mark it as being seen. Move the marker and pointer. Nature Mahjong. Nothing wrong with Nature Mahjong here, but I'm not going to make a short around that. I think there is considerably fewer people interested in playing Mahjong as there are people who make Mahjong games. And at least for the most part, people have given up on that idea. Heart of Iona is a narrative game where you choose to shape the story. Let's see, should I make YouTube shorts around visual novels, or are they just too much of a niche? I think I'm going to say no. You know what? I'll say yes. We'll do an experiment here and see if a Western-looking visual novel catches people's attention or not. If anything, I am getting a lot more feedback and comments on the YouTube shorts, so clearly that is the way to go forward as far as getting interactions. And the longer videos, which I would always make, are going to be more for me and for me just making something that's actually more artistic. So we have a puzzle game, we can say no to that. But yeah, the live streams potentially could be shortened if it weren't for the fact that we're accomplishing a lot during the live streams. Otherwise, I would just have to look through all these games on my own, and I wouldn't do it at that point. Under and over, we can all obviously say no to. We have Yappy Knockout. I would say probably no to this. It does have some visual polish to it, but it's probably not going anywhere. Free to play online PvP. The name Yappy seems like a bad name. Almost seems like it's a mistranslation from Yippee. Because Yappy just means you talk too much. So yeah, I'm gonna say no to this. Rescue to the Parallel. Another garbage looking game. We're almost done today. Psycho Robots Prologue. Again, nothing. Citizens on Mars Prologue. Citizens on Mars may actually be a game, but I don't see reason in promoting Prologue. I guess if I got really desperate, I might start to highlight and make YouTube shorts around prologues. One of the things I need to do is I'm going to update and hope it works. So once my YouTube shorts get made, it will delete the original video files that aren't rotated 90 degrees because the videos are recorded weirdly on their sides, and then I run a second program to rotate them. That's just because of how OBS is set up. I could probably do it a different way now, but it's not worth it to change. But what I want to do is delete the original files, because for every final file, particularly when making a YouTube short, I have 2 extra files that need to be deleted, and just automating that, because YouTube shorts aren't that important to me, makes a lot of sense. It does seem like, with the exception of the VR adult game, we're not going to see any other adult game. This Fantastic Dream looks like a Chinese visual novel. Nothing particularly well animated or interesting about it, so we can say no to that. Which, yeah, it definitely still feels like there's bundling that happens with adult games, that they get released in blocks. And so I suspect Wednesday's stream will run into a bunch of adult games. Soul Detective here. It feels like it's a mobile game that's been ported to PC. It's way too big of a heads-up display menu. And it just looks too generic, so we're going to say no to that. Rise of the Blocks looks too simplistic. Greed of Man looks like a low polygon survival shooter game of no interest. Then our final game for today is Paddle Flap. One of the other things, we're going to say no to Paddle Flap too. So I only have like 5 YouTube shorts today. Very, very few. But one of the things I also thought of is that I'm probably going to update these slideshows to see if I can get them to have a date. It would be fairly useful for me to have a date at the very beginning slide and at the very end. That way if my computer reset, which we've gone 3 hours streaming and my computer hasn't reset, thank goodness. I would really suck if all of a sudden there was actually something wrong with my computer and it was just resetting randomly. Of course, I really won't know that until I'm with full confidence, until I've played like all of Shadow of Tomb Raider and put 60 plus hours into gameplay. But yeah, if my computer had reset, having the date at the very beginning of the video, which will almost always be captured, and at the very end of the video, which will hopefully always get captured, and then trying to splice those two videos together, it's very easy to go, this date matches with this date, that way, instead of having to listen to me saying what day it is or try and find out context clues, particularly if I have to listen to what I'm talking about at the end of the first part of the video and then start the second part of the video and see if those two match up in any way. Yeah, that's just more work, and we're all about automation and reducing the amount of work as possible. I am all about that because I want to have more free time and more energy to play video games and less time to mess with videos and try and make them look better or fix problems. Although if I could hire somebody else to make my videos look better, I would. But also, I'd say even when I do have a lot of time, I'm often mentally exhausted. So I don't know if I can gain a lot more energy around video games. Very often, particularly when the humidity is high or the heat is high, I just want to lie down in bed and play games on my phone instead, which has become an increasing distraction. I need to uninstall 2 or 3 games off my phone. Anyways, that's all stuff I need to work on personally myself. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos because that helps me with YouTube. If you want to support me even further, there's some links down below in the description box.